Let's talk about inheritances. I deal with inheritances as a financial professional several times a year, and I have some thoughts specifically that inheritances and the way that we receive inheritances really is disrupting the American financial landscape. Why do I think that? Stay with me. So, as a certified financial planner and as a private wealth advisor, I deal with estates a lot. I deal with estate planning and estate lawyers and estates a lot. I would say at least 3 to 4 times a year, either someone in my book of business dies and there's estate matters that need to be closed out, or I have someone in my book of business who has a close relative who dies and we have to deal with an inheritance or estate matters, but I deal with it quite frequently. So I see a lot dealing with inheritances and estates. I had to look up some facts about inheritances, but about half of Americans never receive an inheritance. And that makes sense. Some people just don't have anything to pass on. They may not have a family that has assets that can pass on anything to them. But half of Americans, 50%, never receive an inheritances. The average inheritance is $46,200, but the median inheritance is $12,353. So when there's a big difference between the mean and the median, that tells me that there are some people who are receiving a lot of money and some people who are receiving very little money. But most people are receiving very little money. So most people are probably receiving under that $46,200. Top 1% of households receive 719,000 as next generation as an inheritance. And the average age of inheritance is about 50 to 60 years old. There is differences in races. African Americans and Latinos skew younger, while white clients tend to skew older. That pretty much holds with my experience in terms of age range. Typically, the age that most people inherit is somewhere between 50 and 60. With some rare exceptions, people may inherit a little bit younger. I rarely have someone who inherits in their 20s or 30s. I've seen that a few times in my book of business, and it's been through extraordinarily tragic circumstances. A parent died young, a car accident, a murder, an accident that took someone out very young. Why are most people receiving inheritances in between the age of 50 and 60? People are living considerably longer. Anytime I see an inheritance, the person who died was either in their very late 80s or early 90s when they passed away. And the person who receives it in their 50s, 60s, a very interesting thing happens. When you're in your 50s, 60s, you're just in a different stage of your financial life, right? If you had received that money in your 20s or 30s, you really could have used it because that was the time you were buying your first home, having your first children, paying tuition, paying off student loans. That inheritance really could have made night and day difference in your life. But instead, you received it at 55 after you've paid off your student loans. Some people have paid off their homes. Some people, kids are grown, and you're on the verge of retirement. And so I've said this and seen this and talked through this so many times with clients who are like, this is a huge blessing, but I really needed this money 20 years ago. I don't have as intense of a need for the money now. What do we do with it? Or the people who receive the big money, like the top 1% who receive 719,000 and up, these people are well heeled themselves. They're often millionaire themselves. And they're like, okay, this is nice. And they put the money into the market or we invest the money, or sometimes it sits in the money market and it collects dust for the next 30 to 40 years until they die. And then their children can inherit. And by the time their children inherit, their children are in their 60s or 70s. So it sits in an account collecting dust yet again. And the reason I wanted to talk about inheritance is because I think it really is a large factor in some of the overall social and financial changes that we're seeing happening in America. We're seeing the retirement of the baby boomer generation. Over the next 30 years, pretty much all of the baby boomers are going to die. The youngest baby boomer right now is about 65, 66, 67. In 30 years, they'll be in their 90s and probably long departed of this earth. We're about to see the largest transfer of wealth between generations, between the baby boomers and Gen X and millennials that this society has ever experienced. A lot of people are not prepared for it. A lot of times when I'm speaking to someone, I make sure to ask them about their estate paperwork. Do they have a will, living revocable trust? Do they have power of attorney? And if they don't have those things, I refer them to a lawyer. Sometimes I'll go to the lawyer with them to get those documents set up because they are crucial. Or they haven't really thought about the inheritance of the next generation. If clients have a large amount of money, an amount of money that I'm pretty sure we're sure they're not going to run out of that money during their lifetime, I really do encourage them, if their kids are young, not if their kids are minors, but if their kids are in their 20s and 30s, and if they're doing well and if they are responsible, they max out the gift exclusion limit, which is $17,000 this year. I can't remember what, but they gift some of that money to their children while they are alive. And once I explained it to the parents that, hey, okay, your kid's 35, he or she's doing well. She has two minor children under the age of 5 and is paying for daycare. Yes, she'll receive the money 30 years from now, but gosh darn it, she really needs that money now. It would really make sense and would really have a meaningful impact on both your child and your grandchildren's life if you leave that money to them now. The light bulb goes off. Yeah, wait, I hadn't even thought of that. I didn't know that I could do that. And sometimes towards the end of the year or maybe for Christmas, each parent may give a check. Mom gives a check for 17,000, dad gives a check for 17,000, so they don't have to report it to the IRS to help that kid out and their grandkids. And it makes a night and day difference in the next generation's life while that parent is alive. But what we're seeing with people receive inheritances in their 50s and 60s and beyond, we're going to see a lot of capital from the baby boomer generation locked up in savings accounts, in money markets, in the stock market. The problem with that, and I'm all for saving, I'm all for investing, but the money, the capital is not circulating in our economy, right? It's not circulating. It's not paying for tuition for school. It's not paying for a down payment on a house. It's not paying for a car. It's not paying for medical expenses. It's sitting in some brokerage account with me, investment advisors and wealth managers, basically collecting dust for the next 40 years until it could go on to the next generation. And this is a gigantic problem. You're going to see trillions of dollars that is circulating in the economy now because the baby boomers may be spending it on things like travel, dining out. Some maybe later in their years, maybe spending it on like healthcare and medical, but they're spending it. It's circulating in our economy and that dollar is moving around. That dollar is going to end up parked for decades in someone else's accounts. And I think it's going to cause a lot of larger strain on the economy if we can't figure out a way to get people spending that money. Now, some people receive an inheritance and it goes out the window. Many of my clients are very responsible people and they're very wealthy people. They're people who earn into the six figures or who are millionaires themselves. And this extra $250,000, $750,000 doesn't really make a whole hill of beans of difference in their lives. And so their natural inclination, instead of spend it, is invest it, which I admire and is the reason why they've become millionaires over time. But when you have millions of people doing the exact same thing, saying, I'm going to invest it, you have a bigger problem with the economy. And personally, I think a lot of what we're seeing happening in the larger economy and happening in the larger society, the swing towards extremism and a lot of the social mores that are going on in American society is because people are living a lot longer than they ever lived in the past. And people tend to become more conservative the longer that they live. And there's a lot of resources that basically monger and feed on that fear as a source of revenue. And it's causing an extremism swing in our society. But it's also a financial conservatism swing going to happen in our society as Gen X and millennials receive money from the baby boomer generation. And instead of spending that money out in our economy like they would do if they received it in their 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s, it's going to be locked away in a savings account and maybe never spent in our society. This is a different take on inheritances. This isn't to alarm anyone, but to bring up a very interesting idea and thought that I've had about inheritances and what I've seen in my practice as a financial advisor. If you have thoughts, if you have comments, leave it in the comments section. Tell me, like, do you believe in inheritance? Have you ever received an inheritance? What do you think about the baby boomers passing down that money to Gen X and millennials, and that money being locked up for the next 40 years in a money market or investment account until Gen Alpha can receive the money and probably will lock it away in a savings account? They'll probably be 70 or 80 when they receive that money, and they'll lock it away in a savings account and it never gets out there and is spent in our society. If you found this information useful, if you thought that this idea about inheritances is useful, please share and subscribe.